Okay, so we're looking this week at Chapter 6, and Chapter 6 is our chapter on groups, on group structures and forms of formal organization. And as I just mentioned there, the chapter is divided into 3 sections. So in the first part, we're going to look at the types of groups. We'll distinguish between primary and secondary groups as the 2 main sociological groups. We'll look at in-groups and out-groups as subtypes of primary and secondary groups. A good way to remember an in-group is to think of your cliques maybe in high school or middle school. So the people that you hang out with are kind of your in-group, and in some cases there's a hostility felt by that one clique or in-group towards what's called the out-group, the group that's not a part of you, the individuals who are part of another group. So it always, to me, suggests, like the idea of tribalism and cliques when I think of types of groups relative to in and out groups. We'll also define reference groups. So these are the groups to which sociologists attribute that we define our sense of self. So if I want to become a teacher or professor, maybe as I'm moving through college, I associate myself with certain professors or teachers whom I look up to and I think highly of, and thus they become my reference point for, say, my career or my identity in terms of my hobbies or life goals or whatever. The second chapter section is on group size and structure. And if you look at the work of the preeminent German sociologist Georg Simmel, he did a lot on the significance of the types of groups, group size. So for example, looking at a dyad, 2 people versus a triad, 3 people, looking at issues of mediation, how if you have conflict in a triad, one person can serve as a mediator between the dyad or the 2 people. So we'll consider group size, how it influences the dynamics of the group. We'll look at the styles of leadership. So for example, people who lead in a group in an authoritarian style versus a more collaborative or democratic style. You maybe have examples from work. And again, if you're doing your discussion posts, this would be a great opportunity to draw on stuff. If you read a concept like group size or in and out group, think immediately to your social world and say, how can I connect this to something that's going on in my everyday life? That's making the concept meaningful in sociology. We'll then go into conformity and talk about how groups often are swayed or impacted by forms of conformity that develop, and we'll look at some interesting videos as well on the discussion side of things on Canvas. So be sure to watch some of those videos, in particular Alex Gibney's The Human Behavior Experiments, which is a wonderful, wonderful film about the consequences, the negative consequences of group conformity. Now the final section is on formal organizations. We'll look at the types of formal organizations that exist. We'll look at the characteristics of bureaucracy. This is heavily indebted to the work of sociologist Max Weber. He coined the idea of the iron cage of bureaucracy. Think of the person who's working in a cubicle 8 hours a day. They're the happy robot. They're alienated from their work, and they're part of this system that really beats down on them ideologically, beats down on them in terms of their psyche and how they relate to their work, their sense of self, and so forth. So the characteristics of bureaucracies. And then lastly, we'll look at the concepts of the McJob and the McDonaldization of society. And this gets into really taking the work of George Richter in particular, taking the work of Weber, applying it for the 20th or really the 21st century. So looking at how new types of jobs have emerged in society, but they aren't necessarily good jobs in terms of what they provide the individuals who are working in various organizations that have maybe come under influence of what we call the McDonaldization effect in society.